She traded herself for Shelter, the lonely rancher, gave her home and a future. She never dared to dream. The wind at Crow's Hollow carried more than snow, it carried the scent of desperation. Elena pressed her back against the trading post's weathered wall, her breath forming ghostly clouds in the bitter air. Her belly, round with 6 months of unwanted consequence, ached with each gust. The baby's father was 3 towns behind her, but his threats echoed louder than the howling storm approaching from the north. She had nothing. No money. No family. No future. Inside the post, rough voices bartered over pelts and whiskey, but Elena knew what she had to offer was different, dangerous, final. Her fingers traced the bruises on her wrists, purple reminders of why she'd fled into the wilderness with winter's teeth at her heels. The storm would hit by nightfall. Without shelter, she and her unborn child would become just another tragedy the frontier swallowed without pause. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the flutter of life that depended entirely on the choice she was about to make. Some trades couldn't be undone. Some shelters came with prices that changed you forever. But as the first fat snowflakes began to fall, Elena realized she was past caring about the cost. What would you trade for survival? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our most desperate moments lead to our greatest blessings. The trading post door groaned like a dying animal as Elena stepped inside. Silence fell like an executioner's blade. Every weathered face turned toward her eyes, cataloging her swollen belly, her torn dress, the desperation she wore like a second skin. The air reeked of unwashed bodies, stale tobacco, and the kind of judgment that came cheap in places where hope went to die. "Help you, miss." The trader's voice dripped with false courtesy. Elena straightened her spine. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I need shelter for the winter." A cruel laugh erupted from a bearded man near the stove. "Shelter ain't free, girl. What you got to trade?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Myself." The words hung in the thick air like smoke from a funeral pyre. She forced herself to continue each word a nail in her own coffin. "I can cook, clean, work. I'll be a wife to any man who'll have me. Give me a roof till spring." "Damaged goods," someone muttered. "Already got a bun in the oven." "Beggars can't be choosers," another voice added, but Elena couldn't tell if he was talking about her or them. The door creaked again. This time, the silence that followed was different, heavier. Elena turned and felt her blood freeze. The man in the doorway was a nightmare carved from flesh and shadow. Half his face was a twisted landscape of scar tissue, the skin pulled tight and shiny like melted wax. His left hand gripping the doorframe bore the same terrible marks. The unmarked half of his face might have been handsome once, but the scars made it impossible to tell where beauty ended and horror began. "Marcus," the trader whispered. The scarred man's single good eye swept the room, lingering on Elena. She wanted to look away, but found she couldn't. There was something in that eye, not pity, not hunger, but a recognition that chilled her more than the winter wind. "I heard the lady's proposition." Marcus said, his voice rough as gravel, gentle as falling snow. "I'll take her." The room erupted in murmurs. Elena felt the world tilt sideways. "Marcus, you sure about this?" the trader asked. She's carrying a child who'll die in this storm." Marcus stepped fully into the light, and Elena saw how carefully he moved, as if his own body was something he'd learned not to trust. "I have a cabin, warm, dry. She can work for her keep." He looked directly at Elena then, and she saw something in his scarred features that made her chest tighten. Not desire, not possession, understanding. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Elena." He said it like he was tasting it, finding it acceptable. I'm Marcus Shaw. I have a ranch 20 miles north. You'll work hard. I'll ask nothing else of you that you don't freely give. The child—" He paused, something flickering in his good eye. "The child will be safe." Outside, the wind howled like all the demons of hell were riding the storm clouds. Elena looked at the faces around her, some disappointed, others relieved they wouldn't have to make a choice between charity and desire. Then she looked at Marcus Shaw, half monster, half man, her only hope of seeing spring. "I accept," she said. The scarred rancher nodded, once sharp and final as a handshake with fate itself. The wagon ride was 20 miles of purgatory. Marcus drove in silence, his scarred hands steady on the reins, despite the howling wind that tried to tear them from the narrow mountain path. Elena huddled beneath a heavy buffalo hide, her body jolting with every rut and stone, the baby in her belly protesting each harsh movement. The snow fell in earnest, now transforming the world into a white, shrouded tomb. She stole glances at the man beside her, trying to read the story written in his destroyed flesh. Burns. Definitely Burns. But how, when, and why did he live so far from everything human and warm? There, Marcus said his first word in 2 hours. Through the swirling snow, Elena saw a cabin that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Solid. Weathered. Built to withstand whatever the wilderness could throw at it. Smoke curled from the chimney he'd banked a fire before leaving, planning for their return. The barn stood separate, dark, and silent. A corral held 3 horses who turned their rumps to the wind with the wisdom of creatures born to harsh places. "It's not much," Marcus said, swinging down from the wagon seat with careful precision. "But it's warm." Elena accepted his help, down trying not to flinch when his scarred hand touched hers. His grip was gentle, steady. Safe. Inside the cabin revealed itself as a study in masculine solitude. Everything had its place, tools hanging on wooden pegs, books stacked with military precision, a kitchen scrubbed clean as a church altar. It was the home of a man who'd learned to depend on no one but himself. "Your room." Marcus gestured to a small chamber off the main living space. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out onto an endless expanse of white. "I'll sleep out here by the fire. You'll have privacy." Elena stepped into the tiny room and felt tears threaten. It was more than she dared hope for. A door that closed. A bed that was hers alone. A window to watch the world wake up each morning. "The baby," she started, then stopped. Marcus was lighting an oil lamp, the flame casting wild shadows across the ruined landscape of his face. "When?" he asked without looking at her. 3 months. Maybe less. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "I've delivered foals, calves. It's not so different." He paused, his scarred hand still on the lamp. "I'll send for the doc when the time comes. If the weather permits." If the weather permits. 3 words that contained all the danger and uncertainty of frontier life. She could die in childbirth. The baby could die. They could both die, and Marcus Shaw would bury them in the spring thaw alongside whatever other casualties winter claimed. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you take me?" Marcus finally looked at her then, and she saw something flicker in his good eye. Pain. Old and deep and carefully contained. "Because I know what it's like to be a monster people run from," he said quietly. "And because I know what it's like to need shelter from a storm you didn't create." He turned away before she could respond, busying himself with stoking the fire. But his words hung in the warm air between them, a bridge built from shared understanding of what it meant to be damaged goods in a world that prized perfection. Outside, the storm raged against the cabin walls. Inside, 2 broken people began the delicate dance of learning to coexist in the space between desperation and hope. Elena touched her belly, feeling the baby stir. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. Not yet. Days melted into weeks. The storm that had driven Elena to Marcus's door was just the first of many that winter threw against their mountain refuge. Elena learned the rhythm of ranch life: wake before dawn to start the fire, prepare simple meals from stored supplies, mend clothes by lamplight while the wind screamed overhead. Marcus worked outside in conditions that would kill lesser men, tending to livestock, chopping wood, maintaining the machinery of survival with methodical precision. He spoke little, but Elena began to read the language of his silences. The way he paused at the door before coming inside, giving her time to compose herself. How he left hot coffee on the stove each morning before heading out to his chores. The careful distance he maintained, never crowding her space, never making demands. Her belly grew rounder. The baby's movements became more pronounced, sometimes causing her to gasp and press her hands to her sides. "Kicks like a mule," she said one evening, catching Marcus watching her from across the room. Something almost like a smile tugged at the unmarked corner of his mouth. "Strong. That's good. Were you ever—" She stopped, unsure how to ask if he'd ever been married, ever had children, ever been anything other than this scarred hermit living at the edge of the world. The almost smile vanished. Once. A long time ago. He didn't elaborate, and Elena didn't push. They'd both learned that some stories were too heavy to share with strangers, even strangers who shared your roof and your meals and your careful, cautious silences. But one night when the wind was howling like all the banshees in hell and the cabin creaked under the assault of another blizzard, Elena woke to screaming. Not the wind. Human voices. Marcus's voice raw with terror and anguish. She found him by the dying fire, thrashing in his bedroll, his scarred face twisted with nightmare. "Sarah," he cried. "I can't reach you. The fire." Elena knelt beside him without thinking, her hands on his shoulders. "Marcus, wake up. You're safe." His good eye snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a moment she thought he might strike out at her, lost as he was in whatever hell his dreams had dragged him through. Then recognition dawned. Elena. Her name was a whisper, a prayer, an anchor thrown to a drowning man. "Just a dream," she said softly. "You're safe." He sat up, his breathing ragged. In the firelight she could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "Who's Sarah?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Marcus went very still. "My wife," he said finally. "She died in the fire that did this." He gestured to his scars with bitter economy. "I tried to save her. Wasn't fast enough. Wasn't strong enough." Elena felt her heart crack open. "I'm sorry." She was carrying our first child. His voice was flat now, drained of emotion. "I lost them both." The silence that followed was different from their usual careful quiet. This was the silence of wounds laid bare, of truths too terrible for daylight. "Is that why you brought me here?" Elena asked. "Because I'm carrying a child." Marcus looked at her, then really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Maybe. I don't know anymore." He reached out as if to touch her face, then caught himself. His scarred hand fell back to his side. "You should go back to bed. Get your rest." But Elena didn't move. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She took his scarred hand in both of hers. His skin was rough, twisted, the fingers slightly crooked where they'd healed wrong. But it was warm. Real. Alive. "We're both ghosts," she said quietly. "Both haunted by what we lost." Marcus stared at their joined hands. "You shouldn't touch me. He trailed off. "What? Scarred?" Elena almost smiled. "Look at me, Marcus. Really look. I'm carrying another man's child. A man who beat me, used me, threw me away when I became inconvenient. If anyone's damaged goods, it's me. That's not, it is. Her grip on his hand tightened. But maybe damage doesn't mean worthless. Maybe it just means we've survived things that should have killed us. Something shifted in Marcus's good eye. A wall cracking, maybe. Or a door opening just a fraction. Get some sleep, he said, but his voice was gentler now. Both of you. Elena rose, but she didn't immediately return to her room. Instead, she stood there in the firelight looking down at this scarred man who'd given her shelter when no one else would. Thank you, she said, for everything. This time Marcus didn't look away. Thank you for staying. Spring came like a whispered promise, melting the snow in silver streams that sang down the mountainsides. Elena's belly had grown enormous, the baby riding so low she could barely walk, without pain shooting through her back and hips. Marcus had grown quieter as her time approached his movements around her, more careful, more protective. He'd sent word to the doctor in the valley, but the spring melt had washed out the bridges. If the baby decided to come early, they'd be on their own. Like always, Marcus muttered, checking his medical supplies for the dozenth time. Elena watched him from her chair by the window. Over the winter months, she'd learned to read the geography of his moods, the tension in his shoulders, the way his scarred hand flexed when he was worried, the careful distance he maintained even as he cared for her with the devotion of a man tending something precious. Something had changed between them, slow as seasons shifting. She caught him watching her sometimes, his good eye holding an expression she was afraid to name. And she, God help her, had begun to watch for him at the window. When he was late returning from his chores, her heart settling only when she saw his familiar figure cresting the hill. It was dangerous, this softening between them, this careful tenderness that felt more intimate than passion. Marcus, she said one afternoon as he prepared to ride down to check the lower pastures. What happens after... He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. After what? After the baby comes. After I've fulfilled our bargain. She forced herself to meet his eyes. Do I leave? The silence stretched between them like a rope under tension. Marcus stepped back into the cabin, closing the door with deliberate care. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know what I want anymore. It was the truth, stark and frightening. She'd come here to trade her body for shelter, nothing more. But somewhere in the long winter nights and careful morning conversations, somewhere in the way he'd held her hand during that terrible nightmare, she'd begun to hope for something she'd never dared dream of. A real home. A real family. A man who looked at her and saw not damaged goods, but something worth protecting. Elena. Marcus started, then stopped, as her face contorted with sudden pain. The contraction hit like a fist to the spine. Elena doubled over, gasping, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the chair arm until her knuckles went white. How long? Marcus was beside her instantly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Since this morning, she gasped as the contraction passed. They were far apart. I thought I had more time. First babies are unpredictable. His voice was calm, professional, but she could see the fear flickering in his good eye. We need to get you to bed. The next contraction came faster, harder. Elena cried out and Marcus swept her into his arms, carrying her to her small room. His strength surprised her. She'd grown heavy with the baby, but he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. I can't do this, she whispered as another wave of pain crashed over her. I'm scared. Marcus knelt beside the bed, his scarred face inches from hers. You can. You're the strongest person I know. What if something goes wrong? What if the baby... Look at me. His voice was firm, commanding. Nothing's going wrong. I won't let it. Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort, and Marcus's steady voice guiding her through each contraction. He'd seen births before, animals, not humans, but his hands were gentle, sure as if he'd been delivering babies all his life. "I can see the head," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "Elena, you're almost there." One final push, a moment of burning pressure, and then a cry. Thin, outraged, utterly alive. "A girl," Marcus breathed, and Elena heard something in his voice she'd never heard before. Joy. Pure, unguarded joy. He cleaned the baby with gentle efficiency, wrapped her in soft cloth, and placed her in Elena's arms. She was perfect. Tiny fists, a screwed-up red-face, eyes that would probably be blue like her mother's. "Hello, sweetheart," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one." She looked up to find Marcus watching them both, his scarred face soft with an expression that made her chest tight with unnamed emotion. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." Marcus reached out, then hesitated. "May I?" Elena nodded, and his scarred finger gently touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers curled around his, gripping tight, and something in Marcus's face simply broke open. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect. She needs a name," Elena said softly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still captured by the baby's grip. "Hope," he said finally. "Her name should be Hope." Elena looked at this scarred man who'd given her shelter, delivered her daughter, and somewhere in the process stolen her carefully guarded heart. "Hope Shaw," she said, testing the sound of it. Marcus's head snapped up, his good eye wide with surprise and something that might have been desperate longing. "If you'll have us," Elena added quietly. "Both of us, not as your obligation, but as your family." The silence that followed was the sound of two hearts learning to beat in rhythm, of two broken people discovering they could make something whole together. "Elena," Marcus said, and her name on his lips sounded like a vow. "I'd be honored." Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing the world clean for new beginnings. 6 weeks later, Elena woke to the sound of horses and harsh voices in the yard. Baby Hope stirred in her arms, making the small sounds that meant she'd be hungry soon. Through the window, Elena could see 3 riders dismounting, their faces hard with purpose. Her blood turned to ice water as she recognized the man in the lead. Silas, Hope's father, the man she'd fled from in terror all those months ago. "Marcus," she called, but he was already moving his rifle in his hands, his face grim as carved stone. "Stay inside," he ordered, but Elena was already up, clutching Hope to her chest, her mind racing with panic and desperate calculation. "You can't face him alone," she whispered. "He's got men with him. And he's what?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "Dangerous. He doesn't like to be told no." The sound of boots on the porch steps, a heavy fist pounding on the door. "I know you're in there, Elena." Silas's voice carried all the charm of a rattlesnake's warning. "Come out now, and maybe I won't have to get unpleasant with your new protector." Marcus moved to the window, rifle ready. 3 men, armed. "They've got us surrounded." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was her fault. Her past, her mistakes, had brought violence to Marcus's door, to their home. "I'll go with him," she whispered. "He just wants the baby. If I go, like hell." Marcus's voice was flat, final. "This is our home. Our family. Nobody takes that away." The door exploded inward under Silas's boot. He stood framed in the entrance like something out of a nightmare, bigger than Elena remembered, meaner, his eyes holding the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Well, well," he drawled, taking in the domestic scene with obvious amusement. "Ain't this cozy? The monster and his whore playing house. Get out." Marcus's rifle was trained steady on Silas's chest. "Now." Silas laughed a sound like breaking glass. "That's my woman you're harboring, freak. My child she's carrying. I've come to collect what's mine." "She's not carrying your child anymore," Elena said, finding her voice. "She's born, and she's not yours." Silas's eyes went flat and deadly. "Everything you are is mine, Elena. Everything you have. Everything you'll ever be." His gaze flicked to Marcus with contempt. "Including whatever pathetic arrangement you've made with Scarface here." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "You've got 10 seconds to walk out that door," Marcus said conversationally. "Or I put a hole in you big enough to drive a wagon through. You won't shoot." Silas was smiling now, the cruel smile of a man who'd spent his life breaking things weaker than himself. "Because you know if you do, my boys outside will burn this place down around your ears. And Elena here, well, she knows what happens when she disappoints me." He took a step forward, and Elena instinctively shrank back, the old terror flooding through her. But then Marcus moved, placing himself between them, his scarred body a wall of protection. "Touch her and die," Marcus said simply. Something in his tone made Silas pause. This wasn't the bluster of a man trying to seem dangerous. This was the quiet certainty of someone who'd already decided he was willing to pay any price to protect what mattered to him. "You'd die for her?" Silas asked, genuinely curious. "For a used-up whore and a bastard child, without hesitation." The two men stared at each other, and Elena saw the exact moment when Silas realized he'd miscalculated. He'd expected to find a scarred hermit alone and easily intimidated. Instead, he'd walked into the den of a man who'd already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued, his voice never losing that deadly calm. "I'm not planning to die today." The rifle cracked like thunder. Silas staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, his face white with shock and pain. "The next one goes through your heart," Marcus promised, already working the lever to chamber another round. Chaos erupted outside. Shouts, running footsteps, the sound of horses being hastily mounted. Silas's men, hearing gunfire, were cutting their losses and running. In their world, loyalty was a luxury nobody could afford. Silas looked around the cabin at Marcus with his smoking rifle, at Elena holding their baby with fierce protectiveness, at the life they'd built together in defiance of everything that had tried to break them. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward the door. "Yes," Elena said quietly. "It is." She stepped forward, still holding hope, her fear replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "You have no power here, Silas. No claim. No right. I'm not the broken girl you threw away. I'm a mother now. A wife. And I'm protected by a better man than you'll ever be." Silas's face twisted with rage, but he could see the truth in her eyes. She was no longer afraid of him. The woman who'd fled into the wilderness carrying his child was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd found her worth in the love of a scarred rancher and the fierce protectiveness of motherhood. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." "The only thing I regret," Elena said, "is wasting so many years being afraid of you." Silas stumbled out into the yard, clutching his wounded shoulder, and hauled himself onto his horse. He rode away without looking back, and Elena knew with bone-deep certainty that she'd never see him again. Marcus set the rifle aside and gathered both Elena and Hope into his arms, holding them as if they were the most precious things in the world. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe. Both of you. Forever." Elena leaned into his strength, feeling the last chains of her past finally break and fall away. They were free. 2 years later, Elena stood at the kitchen window, watching Marcus teach Hope to walk in the green meadow behind their home. The little girl took 3 wobbling steps before falling onto her bottom in the soft grass, giggling with the pure joy only children possessed. Marcus scooped her up, spinning her around until her laughter rang across the valley like church bells. Again, again, Hope demanded, her blue eyes so like her mother's sparkling with delight. Marcus obliged his scarred face soft with the kind of love Elena had once believed existed only in fairy tales. He'd never tried to be Hope's father by force or declaration. He'd simply loved her from that first moment when her tiny fingers had curled around his, and somehow that had been enough. More than enough. The sound of approaching hooves made Elena look up. A wagon was cresting the hill, the weekly supply run from town, but also something more. Word had spread about the scarred rancher and his family, about the woman who'd chosen love over fear, about the baby who'd brought healing to a broken man. Others had begun to come. Not many, and not often, but enough. Women fleeing bad situations. Men looking for honest work and a second chance. The ranch had become something Elena never expected, a sanctuary for the lost and broken, a place where damaged people could heal. "Looks like we have visitors," she called to Marcus. He looked up from where Hope was now attempting to chase a butterfly, his good eye finding Elena in the window. Even at this distance, she could see the love in his gaze, the quiet contentment that had replaced the haunted emptiness she'd first encountered. They'd married properly last spring with the circuit preacher and half the valley in attendance. Not because they needed legal papers to make their union real, but because they wanted the world to know this was a family built to last. Marcus jogged back toward the house. Hope riding on his shoulders, both of them laughing. Elena met them at the door, and Marcus leaned down to kiss her, a soft, sweet greeting that still made her heart flutter. "I love you," he said quietly, as he did every day, as if the words were a talisman against the darkness they'd both known. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The wagon pulled into the yard, and Elena saw familiar faces, Tom and Mary Patterson, who'd arrived 6 months ago with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a determination to start over. Behind them, a young woman Elena didn't recognize her face, bearing the hollow look of someone running from demons. "Room for one more," Tom called out, gesturing to their passenger. Elena looked at Marcus, saw the understanding pass between them. Their home had grown from a cabin of solitude into a haven of hope. There would always be room for one more lost soul seeking shelter from life's storms. "Always," Elena called back. As the wagon approached, Marcus took her hand, his scarred fingers intertwining with her smooth ones in a grip that had become as natural as breathing. Hope babbled happily in his other arm, reaching for the butterfly that danced just beyond her grasp. Elena thought about the desperate woman who'd traded herself for shelter in a frontier trading post, certain she was choosing the least terrible of terrible options. She could never have imagined this a love that healed, instead of wounded, a home built from mutual respect and shared dreams, a future bright with possibility. Sometimes the worst moments of your life were just the dark before a dawn you never saw coming. "Come on," Marcus said softly, squeezing her hand. "Let's go welcome our guest home." Together they walked toward the wagon, toward the newcomer who needed what they'd found in each other, proof that broken things could be made whole, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, that home wasn't a place you found, but something you built with the people who chose to stay. The butterfly Hope had been chasing finally landed on Marcus's scarred hand, its wings a brilliant flash of orange and gold in the afternoon sunlight. Hope squealed with delight, and the sound carried across the valley like a promise. Here in this place of second chances, everyone was welcome. Everyone was home. Found this story moving? Hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love, hope, and second chances that prove even our darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. What would you trade for a chance at true happiness? Share your thoughts below. Total word count 5,497 words.